Hello, I'm Angela Clark of FREA, and on behalf of Empowerment from Abuse, I'd like to welcome you to this conversation with our founder, Robin Trainor. We are talking about her mission and why she wanted to start an organization like FREA and her journey to get here. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support and educate and empower people to free themselves from the effects of sexual abuse. So we support caregivers and survivors using mind-body methods for emotional first aid. If you're joining us live, let us know you're here with the hello, and feel free to post any questions during the interview. So welcome, Robin. I'm so excited to talk.
Thank you, Angela. I really appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to have you share what led you to start the organization and get the message out about this type of healing. So I'm going to let you start it at the beginning. It's a beautiful story.
Well, just want to say also that there was a team of us who really started FREA.
Okay.
Not just me. We had a core group that's been working on this for years because we all care about recovery and people who've had sexual trauma.
Yes, and I'd like to acknowledge, though, I'm pretty sure that it was your vision and drive that was the impetus for the beginning. So that's why we have called you the founder of it. But you have gathered an excellent team, which we'll actually happily talk about a little bit later. So start us on your journey. I think there's lots of really good information in it.
Okay. Well, right out of graduate school, I interviewed at Lakeland Hospital in the Center for Addictions for folks dealing with alcohol and drug addiction. And as I'm doing this interview, the interviewer said, "So who's the alcoholic in your family?" And I said, "Oh no, there's nobody who's alcoholic." And he said, "Nobody gets into this work because on their own. Right. There's got to be more to this story." And so all the puzzle pieces just fell into place. We were talking previously about puzzle pieces. And all of a sudden, it was absolute paradigm shift. I realized, oh my goodness, drinking in the morning in my family by 10 o'clock is probably not normal. In 6th grade, I gave a teacher in 6th grade who won an award. I went and got a bottle and filled it with alcohol and took it to him.
Wow.
And said, congratulations. And he said, do your parents know about this? And I said, oh, well, they wouldn't mind.
Right.
It was such an integral part of our family that I just thought it was really normal. Well, that really shifted everything. So acknowledging that I am an adult child of 2 alcoholic parents and some grandparents in there too, and cousins, and it's a family disease, I started the Young Children of Alcoholics program. And again, very quickly, my practice grew. I started private practice to people who grew up with alcoholism too. And also very early on, I found out that many of the folks that were dealing with children of alcoholic issues did not have support, and that was the folks that had had sexual trauma in their lives. So in my naivete, I thought they deserve a group of their own to really deal with these issues. So, and I mentioned to you, I went to my supervisor at University of Pennsylvania School of Psychiatry, the marriage counsel who specializes in human sexuality. And I said, I'm going to be working with this group for people who've experienced sexual trauma. What do I do? And my supervisor said, I don't know. And I realized at that point, and this was quite a few years ago, that I was on my own, because now I had this group who really had needs, and I had the people who support me didn't know what to do. But I stepped out in faith, believing that everything is healable.
Right.
So I would just, like you said before our interview, I would literally pray and say, I don't know what to do here. Respond through me. Whoever guides me, my higher power, the higher power of the group, please direct me about what to do. And so many of the techniques that are actually part of the energy techniques came through from that process. And I also told you that because these folks are dealing with sexual trauma, but they're also dealing with, being adult children of alcoholics, people would be sitting there, and I'm just out of graduate school, telling me their issues. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I feel that way too. I think that way too. And I'd go home and develop an intervention for myself. And if it worked, I would take it back to my clients. So I joke that for a long time, I was only 2 weeks ahead of my clients because we were co-creating these methods for healing together, actually. So that's how that started. And I ended up becoming known for sexual trauma. And again, it infected my immediate family. I had a child who had a date rape. So I became very motivated to find all the ways of healing that's possible. And it wasn't until finding the energy techniques and actually putting some together myself that it made a difference in really seeing recovery. I know I had, in a previous interview, I had talked about the power of the energetic interventions for treating trauma. We used to say in our naivete that sexual trauma recovery was a 7-year process. And now we're finding that single incident traumas with the energetic interventions can be cleared in one session. Now, there needs to be a lot of support that goes with that, but single incident traumas can be cleared in one session. I know I had talked about, I was at a workshop in Mexico with Mary Mann Morrissey, and a woman stood up, and I had just had surgery, so I wasn't at my best. But a woman sitting right next to me, not 2 seats away, but right next to me, stood up and said, 8 years ago, I was gang raped. And I grow in bitterness, and my life has fallen apart. And I cannot heal. I can't heal. She said, I'm doing, she was doing hands-on energy work. And I said, well, would you like to clear it? Right next to me, again, 2 seats down, I might not have said anything, but right next to me, that was a sign. And she said, well, nothing has worked. I said, well, this may not, but let's give it a try. So we found a space in the hotel, in the, a quiet space. And we began doing the trauma release techniques. And at first, she was at a 10, of course, and 0 to 10. 10 is the highest. She was able to go down to a 0. And I said, okay, now tell me the story from the beginning. So she started at the very beginning. And every time she went back up, we took it down with some of the energy techniques until she was able to tell the story from beginning to end. In 45 minutes, the trauma was gone. Because trauma memories loop in our base brain. They just loop. And non-trauma memories move base brain, midbrain, forebrain, and clear. So all we did was open the doorway for that trauma to move through. And then her higher self or her frontal lobe could take over from that. We talked to her a year later, and from that single 45-minute session, it still was gone. So with these techniques, unless there is a equal intense trauma reenactment, the trauma methods of the trauma is gone. Because that doorway opens, it moves through. We have a different perception in our intentional brain and our higher brain than we did in our younger child reactive brain.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful story that talks about the interruption of the way it had been. And is my audio not on?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So if once we interrupt it, then that's because otherwise it's just stuck. It's just static,
Yes. Yeah.
energetic. It's also brain is stuck. There is science that can show the stuckness of these things in our body. And there was probably some physical symptoms that she was having as well that went away when she cleared this emotionally and energetically. And, because it clears us somatically and it clears our, it declutters the and interrupts the neurons in the brain. So that's what's so powerful about that story. And we've actually published that story in the blog in the last week. So because it's such a powerful story. So let's go back to, obviously you've seen evidence of why this works, but let's go back to your story of what arrived you on the doorstep of saying, let's create a nonprofit and let's really spread this message.
Okay. So as we were really developing techniques to assist clients, the old form of treating trauma was giving someone a chance to say what they couldn't say, feel what they couldn't feel, and do what they couldn't do.
Okay.
Well, that was all we had. Or cognitive behavioral therapy, I changed the thoughts about what happened. And once we began to learn some of the trauma reduction techniques that FREA teaches, we went back to the people who had done the long trauma work, the 7 years worth of trauma work. And I was shocked at how much trauma was still left in the body, because talking about it doesn't release the trauma. Understanding it doesn't release the trauma. And we know from nature when we look at it, if we see a deer who all of a sudden comes across a lion and the lion is chasing the deer and the deer runs and it beats out the lion. Now there is a lot of adrenaline right afterward. That deer will shake out that energy. It will move it through. Yeah. And an hour later, that deer is eating grass as if it was the most relaxed thing on the planet.
Right.
So, yeah. So we really wanted to make sure that all of our traumas are cleared out. And so I think I told you too, when I first learned these trauma techniques, the first person I worked on was myself, because of growing up with alcoholism, because of dealing with life's traumas, because of having a child that had a date rape, because of having a marriage end. I had massive amounts of trauma. So I spent a lot of time clearing myself out, and I didn't realize it. And as someone who's a healer, you'd appreciate this too. But I didn't realize that at times I was using my own energy to support somebody. In wanting them to have a different experience, I was using my own energy. And what I was doing was depleting myself. So I was a pretty depleted person, seeing a lot of trauma work. So first working on me, then being able to work on clients, and then being able to work on clearing all of the trauma that I had inadvertently taken on from the people that I was supporting. So
Right.
totally changed how I worked. I became, from the moment I learned it, the very first time that I learned that, I was sold. I was not going to let anybody I cared about suffer longer than they needed to. I love that statement that we can't make a perfect external life, but suffering is optional from it.
Yes.
And that healing is possible.
That's right. And it's, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the vicarious trauma, that happens in our day-to-day life. We can watch the news and have vicarious trauma from something we see on the news. And so that self-application of all of the healing techniques, I truly believe that my sexual abuse memories healed up so quickly because I'd already learned all of these tools that were going to become my my emotional first aid, my emergency tools. I've only ever had one panic attack, but I used tapping to get myself out of it. And it was the one time that I was without anybody else around me. I was by myself, and I, of course, so that's what I think. Aside from vicarious trauma, whether it's our own family members or something we see on the news, that ability to be able to take charge of the situation and take charge of our bodies, that's such an important aspect of why I really am drawn to these tools too. But of course, I've heard many stories from you about that same thing. So, all right, so we're getting closer to starting FREA, but we're not quite there yet. I think there's a little bit more.
I spent certainly many years being a trauma therapist and developing new techniques and really being a promoter that recovery is possible. And then I spent the next portion of my life healing myself, but also healing a family that unraveled when there was sexual trauma with a family member. It dominoed through my whole family. It was not just one person, it was all of the family members were affected. And then addictions came into the story. So I spend the next part of my life trying to get my own family back on track. And of course, even though my kids knew the trauma techniques, it was mom. So right. At the time, they weren't welcoming with open arms. It's like, okay, that's her weird stuff that she's doing. Mm-hmm. And yes, so I spend that next time really getting my own life in balance and getting my family, and everybody, by the way, is doing beautifully. Wonderful. So that made that worthwhile. And then I came to the point of saying, we need to get these techniques out to anyone experiencing trauma. Mm-hmm. So we have our sister organization, which is the Peaceful Heart Network, and they are going into Uganda and all over the world in dealing with trauma. And their version is trauma topping technique and making a real difference. Our two organizations are aligned, and they're, as you know, they're on our board too. And I told a quick diversion. I had grandchildren who were also going through quite a bit of trauma. And I could not change the external of what they were going through.
Right.
But every day I told them that you are in the school of learning how to deal with difficult people. I said anyone can be peaceful dealing with joyful people, but you are in the school, and it's a very special school, of learning how to deal with difficult people.
Right.
So every day they would experience crazy trauma that I hadn't even experienced. And, from police to just like really crazy trauma. But every day we would use basic EFT and we'd have fun with it. And we'd go through and they loved it. And we would clear the trauma. So at the end of the day, say this happened, any trauma? No. It's just that, okay, we're dealing with people who are not doing so well right now and are having in pain of their own. So for a long time, I felt sort of resentful, like, why in the world do I have to deal with this now? But what it gave to me, Angela, was the perception that as long as you keep the energy flowing and it doesn't back up, it doesn't have to be ongoing trauma. So I would have preferred to read that in a book instead of experiencing personally. But I became so motivated to get these techniques out to everybody who needed them, because all four of these beautiful beings are doing phenomenally. In all four of them, there's no signs of trauma.
Yeah.
And I watch them really closely. There's no signs of trauma.
And so that's a beautiful story of, it was something that you could do ongoing, like you said, daily, and that would mitigate and neutralize the impact of trauma so that they don't have to deal with it 10 and 20 years afterwards, which is actually most of the work that we do, right?
Yes.
We don't get that opportunity to be present in the moment and to be able to interrupt right then. We are coaching people through it afterwards. So I love that story of how it just go and spend hours what's going on in their life and bring those threads back into the surface. They've already cleared it out. That's beautiful.
Absolutely. And like we talked about, the youngest doesn't even remember. That's repressed, it's just a non-issue anymore. But it really showed that it's not the events that we're exposed to. It's being able to stay open to allow our own healing process to happen in the moment. And if we can't do it then we provide the techniques, safety, and support to do it later. So my vision was, if we can get all these trauma reduction techniques into emergency rooms, into first responders, into the rape crisis centers. I used to volunteer for Women Against Rape in Philadelphia, and we would go out with police at the time at 1 a.m. to people experiencing rape. And had I had the tools then, we could have begun a really gentle way of releasing the trauma before they ever had to be seen by a doctor. So although FREA would love to stop all the trauma that's happening, that may be a mission for another group, but our mission is really providing these tools and techniques right away as soon as trauma happens. So this amazing group has come together, and our goal is to make them available online and in training to as many people as possible.
Yes, and I think, it's because you, actually it's a driving force for all of us on the board, on the committee, that we have all had those personal experiences, those upfront, intimate experiences of the freedom. And that is what compels everyone. We understand the importance and it just, to be able to go in and heal these wounds, I think eventually it will lead to less trauma in the world, but it's going to take a while. It just takes a while to filter out. So there's something else from early on in your experience that I want to point out, that you landed in this organization as a young student for your first job, and in alcohol and recovery, and hadn't articulated yet that you grew up in a family of alcoholics. And we're much more able to identify this. That's one great thing that the World Wide Web has done for us, is we can find this information. Everybody understands this in a way that we didn't a long time ago. I'm 49, and my abuse happened when I was a child. So in those days, even if I had been able to report, it probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. We are just we have a different paradigm now. Yeah. So I'm really excited about the impact that we can make as a group if we can go out and do trainings, and really, that's why I wanted to volunteer to do interviews and to do a bunch of marketing or awareness videos around this and articles, because we are poised. We understand trauma and what it does to the body, what it takes to release it. We understand how the brain works in ways that we didn't before. We understand the importance of emotional well-being and our capacity to love and accept ourselves. So we are really on the brink of changing a paradigm that's been happening for generations, and it's just so time is ripe, and Me Too just pushed it out there on the forefront. So I love that a long time ago, you said to yourself, well, we can heal from everything. And that was your view and lens, that you went through school, you went through seeing clients, all of those early experiences that helped shape you. That's exactly the lens that I had. Well, I can heal from this. So I guess I want to say that's perhaps I was going to ask you, if somebody's really in pain right now, what is the first step? What's the first thing that you would say, be compelled to say to them, just as to address somebody who's really in pain right now?
I would probably give empathy, because because that's opening our heart. If I open my heart right now to you or anyone sitting in front of me, I actually entrain that my heart will start to entrain their heart. Mm-hmm. And creating safety and being heard. So
yes,
the very first thing wouldn't be a technique. The very first thing would be human presence and empathy, and just holding that space to say whatever comes up in a loving presence. So let's
just take a deep breath together. And just for anybody who might be listening now or in the future that is in pain right now, and just the intention is for us to send out the empathy that we both have for somebody who's navigating this tool. So let's just do it in the space of a deep breath, though. Thank you for that.
And by the way, those of us that can feel energy, that was really powerful. I could feel your energy coming at me. Beautiful. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, and it just felt like the natural, we could just sit and gaze in the camera, but in a deep breath, that breath is our life force. And that, anyway. Okay. So with that, we're just nearing our 30-minute mark that we're trying to, counter, or, it helps keep it succinct.
Yes.
Do you have anything else that you want to share before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you for everything that you're doing for FREA and being a spokesperson. And you're a beautiful combination to our group, because most of us are heart-based, I don't want to say airy-fairy, that's not the word I want to use, but both of us are very strong on the touchy-feely kind of side. And you've got a beautiful combination of right brain and left brain, of having the caring, but also having the ability to create the podcasts and the blogs and the interviews. So thank you so much for being a really important addition to
Well, I'm delighted to be here. And as I said to you earlier, it feels like the Me Too movement was created so that I could step up and use all of the skills and tools, the energy techniques, but also my practical getting the message out in the world tools. So I'm really grateful that FREA existed and I didn't have to create it from scratch. And it's been delightful to get to know each one of you on the committee. And I look forward to two things: getting more of the committee members on the interviews, and just coming back and having conversations from time to time with each of you, or any of you that are willing to do it, because what we're talking about, the stories that we share, that's what gives people a semblance of hope. Because if somebody else has seen it and witnessed it and it lived it, experienced it, and healed from it, that's planting the seed that if they can do it, I can do it too. It's a big part of how I got to where I am, and any time that I'm feeling discouraged, I look for, on purpose, inspiring stories that compel me to move forward. So that's my hope with hosting the interviews, is that we can be planting seeds of hope that it can be done, that people don't have to live with the pain and the suffering. So thank you so much for your time, Robin. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. Yeah, and so we are, I will download it to YouTube and feature it in a blog post next weekend. But in the meantime, it's living on Facebook, and it's going to be